We began this manufacturing phase with a completed frame minus the suspension, and we also had some of our suspension started with an A-frame completed and some hinges made. So we thought that a reasonable benchmark for us in this manufacturing period was to get an actual rolling chassis, but we needed to complete our suspension first, so the audience will know we've completed our benchmark when we show them a rolling chassis. And so the first thing we needed to do in order to complete this benchmark was we realized we didn't have enough hinges, so we created more hinges by hollowing out 5/8 inch cold rolled steel and then welding some tube stock to it. But then after we completed all 8 of our hinges we needed, we realized that we actually didn't need all of that tube stock, so we kind of wasted some materials and had to cut off all of the extra bits. The next thing we wanted to work on was we wanted to complete all 4 of our A-frames, which was a more difficult task than we anticipated because it had all these weird angles we had to cut. But we cut them and then we welded them all together and we completed 4 A-frames. While we were working on this, Henri was working on making the turning component that we will weld our front axles to. So what we took was we took giant tube stock and we cut it in half, and then we found a slightly smaller tube stock and we cut that in half and drilled holes in it and put bolts through it, and then we had rotating pieces. Unfortunately, just as we were starting to weld everything together, a member of our group, Henri, had to leave the engineering academy. So we were left as just me and Ian, and then together we welded everything together, which was a lot more battle for the welders than it should have been, but eventually we triumphed and we got all of our A-frames welded to our frame with hinges. Surprisingly, the hardest part about all of these things is finding the correct size bolts for them, because initially we had cut out a bunch of this specific length for these bolts, but then we couldn't find any more of them, so we had to go down and use a smaller size bolt. And then the next problem we faced was we needed to find some way so we could get our part that would make our wheels able to turn welded to our A-frames in such a way that the turning part could move up and down without having it become unaligned. So what we decided to do was we were going to cut off parts of our A-frame and then move them above and weld the more of that 5/8 inch cold rolled steel to it while having the thing inside of it. So what would end up happening is we'd have the tube stock rotating around an axle, and what we have now is all of the tube stock cut out and we have that ready to weld. Just the welders were occupied during studio time, so I couldn't do that. Overall, we didn't complete our benchmark because we didn't get a rolling chassis. We would have been closer, but midway through production, one of our group members dropped out of the academy, and the welders were often taken in times when we needed them, so we couldn't really progress as fast as we would like to. Ultimately, we didn't complete our benchmark, but we got extremely close, so for our next phases, we'll just weld everything together and then get our wheels and axles, and we'll probably have a rolling chassis within the next week of manufacturing. Also, we need to work on our differential at some point in time, which we're going to do as a class, so our HPV is looking pretty well off.